Okay, this is the first lecture dealing with research and research methods. Anyway, I'm Bruce Bradway. I've been teaching at Dene College for 5 years now, and this is my class. I'm going to teach this class. So the first thing we want to talk about is a piece of research that was done a long time ago. And I'm going to explain to you about this piece of research afterwards. But this is the annotation. This is the reference. As you can see, it was done. This article was written by T.R. Garth in 1923. The title is A Comparison of the Intelligence of Mexican and Mixed and Full-Blood Indian Children. It was done, like I said, it's done in 1923. That has a ton to do with how accurate this is. It was first published in Psychological Review, but as we can see from the article, let's go ahead and get rid of this. So we can see from the article, this is the article itself. It was first presented as a paper at the American Psychological Association at Cambridge, Massachusetts on December 29th of 1922. It was later published in the Psychological Review. So this was in 1922, and there's a ton going on in 1920, 22 and 23. The research was done in 1921, and he was looking at various groups of American Indians. He was also looking at Mexicans and people of mixed blood, which was kind of interesting. It's a kind of interesting term down here, as you can see, mixed blood Indians. So he's comparing Mexicans, mixed blood Indians, and full-blooded Indians. He was comparing Indians from the plains and the southeastern tribes, as well as Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache tribes. And the way he was able to do this was by testing native students in two boarding schools, one in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the other in Chilocco, Oklahoma. If you know anything about Chilocco, of course they closed it in 1985, but Chilocco was an Indian boarding school that was north of Ponca City, which is right on the Kansas border, right in the middle of the state, right on, just below the Kansas border. So they were getting a lot of natives from Oklahoma, of course, potentially Kiowa. Actually, they had another um, boarding school down closer to the Kiowa and the Comanche, down near Fort Sill. But they also had Chilocco, and they had the Ponca, and they had the southeastern tribes. And southeastern tribes they're talking about are the five civilized tribes: the Seminole, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Cherokee, and who did I miss? And the Creek. Did I say Creek? I don't remember. Anyway, Creek, Seminole, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw. There we go. Okay, that's all five tribes. And then, of course, they were able to pick up the Pueblo and the Navajo and Apache tribes from Albuquerque. It was really kind of an interesting piece of research that somebody would even think about doing this. There was a ton, like I said, there were a ton of stuff. There was a ton of stuff going on in the United States at the time. Eugenics was big. There were people that were. This is when they were trying to stop the immigrants from coming into the United States. Finally, in 1924, they were successful. But the eugenics movement was big in the United States. And primarily they were talking about intelligence due to your genetics. And of course, that's what eugenics means. It means good genes. So they're trying to show that select groups of individuals were smarter than other groups of individuals. So one of the things they did this research, looking at giving all these kids an intelligence test. Now to the merit of the author Garth, I can't remember what his first name is, Thomas R. Garth, at the University of Denver, as you can see. To his benefit, he did not try to compare the natives and the Mexicans and the mixed blood Indians with with whites, with the dominant group of the time. He also didn't compare any of these individuals with African Americans, who I can't imagine what he would have called them in 1923. But he didn't. He also didn't compare them with Asians. Of course, there were Asians who had come into the United States before 1889 when they wrote a law called the Asian Exclusion Act, which meant that they couldn't immigrate to the United States. Anyway, he did this research. I thought you might be interested in it. And the reason I'm showing you this is because what I want you to see is how research can look legitimate, but it probably isn't. And that's what we're looking at right now. He put it together fairly well, and of course, he presented it to the American Psychological Association. I imagine he didn't get any argument in 1922 when he presented it. I'm just guessing. The Psychological Review printed it, and it's really kind of fascinating. I put this article on the website. It's on your website. If you can look at it if you like, you can read it, and you can print it out and take it out and urinate on it, or burn it, or do whatever you like with it. It's fairly inflammatory. His theory was, and I'll read you his hypotheses if I can find them here. There were 7 of them, if I remember. Here they are. Handling the data. And the questions were: do the frequencies for the measures of the groups arrange themselves with multimodality, or are the measures continuous on the scale? That's not what I wanted to see. Wait a second. We can get better hypotheses than that. Oh, maybe this is it. Okay. Are there differences in central tendencies between the several groups as indicated by overlapping? Are the differences consistent with all the subgroups? That's not what I wanted to see. Anyway, the idea was that he was going to compare all these people, and he was going to prove that these individuals. Okay. Oh, this is kind of interesting. This I was trying to figure out where in the world he found the large Mexican population in order to give them the intelligence test, and I guess he found them in San Antonio, San Antonio, Texas, and then of course he found the native students in Chilocco and in Albuquerque. But he was trying to prove that there was a difference between the two groups. One of his theories had to do with the fact that nomadic tribes were more intelligent than, I'm sorry, this thing's off center. The nomadic tribes were more intelligent than the sedentary tribes. That was one of his theories. And of course, he was looking at mixed bloods and full-blooded natives. Why can't I find that? The hypothesis. Anyway, I love the data. What have I done with it? And it's somewhere else. Okay, sorry about that. I know you're probably getting sick from me flashing this back and forth. Okay, so here are some of the results. What he did, he tested different age groups, 12 to 13-year-olds, 14 to 15-year-olds, 16 to 17-year-olds, and 18 to 19-year-olds. And as you can see, he got the results that he thought he was going to get. The most intelligent individuals were the mixed blood Indians, and second were the Mexicans, and third were the Plains and the southeastern tribes, and then the Pueblo, and then the Navajo and Apache were at the bottom. And as you can, if you look at all of these, they were, it was fairly consistent with all age groups, except for the 18 and 19-year-olds. As you can see, the Navajo and Apache had a higher score than the Pueblo Indians, but all the other groups, of course, were different. Like I said, I'm showing you this not to make you feel bad, but to show you what bad research looks like. Or actually, this isn't bad research. For the time, of course, it was acceptable. You can imagine how many people in the United States pointed to this research and said, "Hey, look how dumb these guys are. Look how much smarter these people are." And they probably quoted this piece of research for years, maybe for decades. Who knows? But of course, we don't follow this anymore. does look like fairly ridiculous, ridiculous situations. As you can see, they used a lot more Mexicans, as you can see, 145. They only had 12 to 13-year-old Navajo and Apache children. And they grouped the Navajos and Apaches together, which is kind of interesting. I'm sure that doesn't make you happy. But he did. I'm not sure why. Maybe because they spoke Athabascan. I don't know. I have no idea. He put all the Pueblos together, which is kind of curious. Put the Plains and the Southeastern tribe, all the Southeastern tribes together. I'm sure that didn't make them happy. As you can see, he was not dealing with a whole lot of people in any circumstance. There's the Pueblos, 82, and the 14 to 15-year-olds, and only 19 Apache and Navajo. Actually, there weren't all that many. Navajo and Apache, they didn't have any Apaches going to Albuquerque who were between 18 and 19. They're all Navajos. That's curious as it is. Anyway, as you can see, this is fairly inflammatory for just about all groups they're dealing with. Thank God they didn't talk about how much more intelligent white children were than mixed bloods Mexicans and all the rest. So as you can see, let's see, these are some of his conclusions. One, I think there is no question but that the presence of a child in the home where one parent is white will influence the child to behave more as a white man behaves. It is simply a question of the influence of the environment. In the full-blood home, the atmosphere of the home is more backward and less influenced by the white civilization. And he's saying, of course, that white civilization is superior to all other ideas, all other philosophies. The mixed blood has more opportunities to learn English in the home because the English language is used to a greater extent than the Indian language. In the full-blood home, generally speaking, the Indian language is used to a considerable extent, even though the parents may be well educated, just as in the home of the Swede or the German. The old mother tongue is used to a considerable extent. Therefore, I would say that the mixed blood has a better opportunity to learn the English language than a full blood by reason of the difference in the home. It's coming up with all these ridiculous conclusions. There's no question but that the Oklahoma Indian has been more closely associated with white civilization than the Pueblo Indian and is more familiar with white ways in the English language. And in reality, I mean, this is an intelligence test made by white people, so what they're doing is measuring how white these individuals are, or how much white knowledge they have. And of course, the more interaction you have between the white community and the native community, the more, the better the score, of course. And that's one of the reasons why they had higher scores in Oklahoma. Of course, Oklahoma had been Indian territory for an extended length of time. Cherokees, well, you can say anything you want about the Cherokee tribe, but the Cherokees tried to make themselves as pale as possible. They did it when they were back east, and then when they were forced to march all the way to Oklahoma, they did it when they were in Oklahoma as well. They joined the Confederacy. They maintained slaves. So yeah, there was a lot of interaction going on between the white community. And if you go to Oklahoma today, there is no reservation for any of the 5 civilized tribes. You can find people who are Choctaw. You can find people that are Chickasaw. You can find people that are Choctaw and Seminole and Creek, but they don't live on they don't speak. Most of them don't speak their language. The Choctaw are pretty good at it. Cherokee are trying to come back with their language. So if you go to Tahlequah, of course, Tahlequah has their street signs are written not only in English, but they're also written in Cherokee, which is not what they call themselves. I can't remember what the Cherokee call themselves. Okay. Well, anyway. So, wait a minute, I wanted to show you the summary. This is his summary from his hypotheses. In the distribution surface, we find unimodality to be the general rule. Even in the case of the mixed blood groups, finer measures might bring to light multimodality in these cases. The measure of intelligence indicates the following sequence. First, mixed bloods. Second, Mexicans. Third, Plains and Southeastern Indians. Fourth, Pueblo Indians. Fifth, Navajo and Apache Indians. The ratios are respectively 127, 107, 100, 88, and 77, using Plains and Southeastern Indians as the base. The estimates of social status indicate the same sequence as the foregoing. The average amount of education of the blood groups runs in the same sequence, except that the Pueblo Indians have slightly more of this than the Plains and Southeastern Indians. The mixed breeds excel the pure breeds in intelligence scores. The scores of these individuals of nomadic tribes excel those of sedentary tribes. If these groups may be taken as representative of their racial stocks, the results indicate differences between their racial stocks and intelligence as they are measured. Because of the fact that the social status and education have not been controlled, we may not positively state, this is the one time he says maybe this is an absolute, we may not positively state that these data indicate innate racial differences in intelligence, but one is inclined to believe that differences in opportunity and in mental attitude toward the white man's way of thinking and living are here made apparent. In some schools, the latter is taken as indicative of a degree of intelligence according as to whether the attitude is positive, indifferent, or actually negative. And of course, there are some things that are correct about that, but obviously, I mean, we're not stupid. So the reality is that, this is a tainted piece of research, and he got exactly what he was looking for. He was trying to prove that nomadic tribes are more intelligent than sedentary tribes. At some point in here, he says that the Mexican people of Mexican descent, he doesn't even refer to them that way, but people who are Mexicans come from nomadic tribes in Mexico. And of course, if you know anything about the history of Mexico, the people in the southern portion of Mexico were Mayan, and they were relatively sedentary. As a matter of fact, almost all the tribes were sedentary all the way up to the Rio Grande. The only tribes that were really nomadic were the ones living in northern Mexico. And of course, anyway, if you know anything about that history, they traded back and forth, or they raided back and forth, as that were. But it was mostly the northern tribes. Southern tribes, or the tribes that were south of the Rio Grande area, and I'm trying to think of what those states are called. I think one of them's Chihuahua. Well, anyway, let's not go into that. There's something else about 1923 that you need to know is that before you read this and say, well, my God, how stupid can you be? That's exactly what was going on in the United States at the time. We've done some really dumb and stupid things in the United States, claiming that it was absolute. One of the dumb things that we were doing was eugenics, the idea of eugenics. And there were select states where they actually sterilized select individuals they didn't want to reproduce. And usually that had to do with intellectual disabilities, people that were epileptic. They would sterilize these people. But this movement was really strong in the United States at the turn of the 20th century into the 1920s, and actually it didn't really burn itself out until fascism, until World War II, when the Germans claimed that they were a superior race, and that all other people they were secondary to the Aryan race. And that's one of the reasons why, we talk about Aryan nation and whatnot, or some people talk about Aryan nation, white supremacy. The reality is, of course, that comes from this concept that white people are superior to all others. And of course, you can find research on the internet from the 1920s and 1930s that state that categorically, these people are the smartest people, and of course they're almost always whoever is talking, usually it's his group that is the most intelligent. There was an individual that was doing research in the late 19th century, and he was French, and he was trying to prove that the French were smarter than the Germans. And one of the ways that he did it was by measuring the size of their heads. Yes, I know this sounds really stupid today, but of course back then it was not considered stupid. Anyway, I showed you this to show you what research looks like. This is not good research. How accurate was the intelligence test? Probably not very. And were the groups that they were talking about representative of their groups? Probably not. And how much education did they have? And one of the things he showed was that the groups that came out on top had more education than the groups that came later on in the grouping. They just had less. They had less schooling, and of course, if they were speaking their own language, as at this time, the 1920s, almost all Navajo and Apache children didn't speak English because they didn't get the schooling in on the Navajo or select Apache reservations. They were still learning English, and of course, he was talking about the kids in San Antonio. There were no Mexicans, there were no Spanish-speaking schools in San Antonio. So if somebody went to school, of course, they were taught in English. Same way in Oklahoma. Most of the southeastern tribes or the tribes in Oklahoma, and of course one of these guys was Jim Thorpe, who graduated from Carlisle in 1911. He was from Prague, Oklahoma, which was right where I used to live, or close to where I used to work. Actually, it's right beside Chandler, where I used to work in Chandler. And so we used to get the individuals coming in from Stroud and from Prague, and of course Stroud is where the Sac and Fox tribal lands are in Oklahoma, and he was Sac and Fox and something else, I think, Chickasaw, I think. But anyway, he wasn't of just one tribe. He was of select other tribes. And in Oklahoma, of course, the Sac and Fox were put on reservations in the same place, not the same tribe. Anyway, I found this fascinating, and it should piss you off. It pissed me off when I first read it. I thought it was ridiculous. So the eugenics movement was going on at this time. The anti-immigration movement was going on at this time. Ku Klux Klan was very strong, especially in the South, but not just the South. They marched on in Washington D.C. They paraded in Washington D.C. One of the largest parades that year. The governor of Indiana was an avowed member of the Ku Klux Klan. He didn't run as a Democrat, didn't run as a Republican. He ran as a Ku Klux Klan candidate, and he won. He only served for 2 years, supposed to serve for 4. He was anyway. That's the crazy stuff that's going on in the 1920s. If you've ever seen the movie Rosewood, that took place in the 1920s. Lots of crazy stuff. They just had a rally. Trump just had a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma had a race riot, and the race riot wasn't African Americans rioting against the white population. It was the white population rioting against the black population. And they went into the black neighborhoods. They burned down all the black neighborhoods. They killed over 100 people. They left 300 families without any place to live. It was a real embarrassment, and of course it's still an embarrassment today. If you watched the rally yesterday or listened to what was going on, they talked about it all day long. The fact that this is not a really good place for Trump for Trump to have his first rally. It's kind of a just the idea is not very good. Okay, well, that's that. Let's get into our lecture. I'm as pissed off about this article as you are, but this is one of the ways that if you don't watch it, if you're not careful, then you not only can come up with bad research, but you can find just about anything you want, or you can say just about anything you want. And of course, this is something that I've been fighting against for my entire career. I was an old civil rights fighter from the 1960s, not really the 1950s. I was too young, but even I was too young, yeah. Yeah, this is something I've been trying to fight against. It's one of the reasons why I've taught on Indian reservations for 17 years. Anyway, okay, well, let's get rid of the ugly stuff and let's talk about research. And let's try to figure out how to make good research. Um, this is chapter 1. It's talking about the scientific approach, and of course nobody's going to listen to you if you don't use good techniques. So what you need to do if this is a direction that you want to go, or actually if you go far enough in psychology, you'll have to write a thesis. And some schools require that you do original research. If you go after your PhD, you'll have to write a dissertation, and you'll have to do original research. So research is the essence of psychology. The only way we know anything is if we the only way we know anything is if we do the research and we can prove it. I was watching CNN this morning, and they were talking to one of the members of the Trump administration, and he was making these accusations against the Chinese. He was saying that the Kung flu, I'm sorry, the Kung flu had originated in. He didn't say originated. He said they manufactured it. He was intimating that that they manufactured it and they meant to send it over to the United States. And of course, he has no proof that this happened. This is an idea that the Trump administration would like to support, because that means it wasn't Trump's fault that he dropped the ball on the COVID-19 crisis. He kind of ignored it for quite a while, actually, for a couple months. And of course, when we're talking about a disease, you've got to stop it, nip it in the bud, as it were. And he wasn't nipping anything. He was trying to pretend that nothing was wrong. He didn't want to close down the economy because that's one of the things he was going to run on for his second term. Okay, so what is science? Science is a concept that is often misunderstood. It really depends on your methodology. And as we said with a piece of research by Garth, 1923, the problem was not the content. Looking at the intelligence of different groups of individuals is probably not something you do today. But at that time, it was very common for people to talk about African Americans, talk about whites, talk about Swedes, they hated Italians, they hated Eastern Europeans at the time. If you were Polish, of course, you were Slav. I mean, all of these things have been part of the American fabric for an extended length of time. So they're not really looking at the content. It was his methodology. Was the test accurate? Who did he test? How many people did he test? Was that enough? Did he test enough people to show that this was accurate? And of course, in most cases, it wasn't the Stanford Binet intelligence test that he was giving. It was a general intelligence test, and of course, it had to do with white America, and so it was culturally biased. The most intelligence tests still are culturally biased. There are things that, I mean, if I used the word elevator to you, You might think of going to Albuquerque and going to a hotel and having to push the button on an elevator. But I live in Iowa, and in Iowa, elevator means a place where you take your grain so it can be processed. I mean, these are, and both are correct. Both ideas of an elevator are correct, but that is one way that you can bias a test. So if somebody's from the city, they know what an elevator is. If somebody's from the country, they have a different idea of what an elevator is. And of course, that's if a 6-year-old is taking an intelligence test and he's from rural Iowa and he sees elevator, he's going to think it's a grain. It's a place where you take your grain. And if somebody's from New York City and they take the same test, they're going to think an elevator is something you go up and down in. So what was the question? I mean, did the question, which answer did the question want? And the answer is probably it was written by a city person, and they thought that the elevator was the thing that goes up and down in the big building. But if you're from rural Iowa, especially in the 1920s, you probably had never been to any place with an elevator or a building with an elevator. You may never have seen anything more than 3 or 4 stories tall. On the Navajo reservation, the largest building is the the NHC at Saley. That's the tallest building on the reservation. Scientists make propositional claims to knowledge, descriptive claims that some state of the world is either true or false. And of course, if we're talking about gravity, if you drop something, it goes down. It goes down to the ground. It doesn't fly up in the air, probably. I'm not sure, unless it's a plastic bag and the wind's blowing. Then it might fly through the air. But as long as the wind's not blowing, it'll drop. And of course, that's scientific knowledge. Propositional knowledge is rooted in a set of beliefs. And of course, this is one of the problems with hard science and soft science. Psychology is a soft science because we're trying to figure out things that are not absolute. If you drop something, if you're dealing with physics and if you drop a ball, then it will go down. That may be true, but how do you define depression? How do you define happiness? How do you define resilience? These are all belief systems. In the United States, of course, we have one definition of happiness and depression. But if you live in Russia, it's a completely different definition. If you're Asian, it's different. It is not seen as the same thing. Your beliefs have to be true, and this is, of course, one of the arguments between the conservatives and liberals. One has beliefs. They believe in one direction. If you're conservative, you have one set of ideas, and if you're liberal, you have a different set of ideas. Your beliefs are different. So as far as they're concerned, one of them is true and the other one isn't. Fake news, the whole concept of fake news. So this whole idea of fake news comes out of Donald Trump's idea. He calls the major media organizations, NBC, ABC, CNN, CBS. He calls them all fake news because they say things that Fox News doesn't say, and Fox News is pro-Trump, so if they will always say positive things about Donald Trump. And of course, the others say different things about Donald Trump, and sometimes they are negative things about Donald Trump. And of course, that he calls fake news. So anything that he does not agree with is fake news, and it is a difference between belief and truth. True beliefs must be justified, and of course, that's one of the things that Jake Tapper was talking to Secretary Navarro today, and Secretary Navarro indicated that he thought that the Chinese, he said this is an open-ended question, did the Chinese did the Chinese manufacture COVID-19 and then release it on the world? That's what he was trying to intimate. And of course, Jake Tapper was looking for justification. He was looking for proof that that was true. Because if Navarro, if the conservatives believe that the Chinese, that it's true that the Chinese manufactured the COVID-19, then of course, and scientifically you have to justify it. And that's one of the strange arguments that we seem to be having in the United States today. Is science, should we follow science or not? Have started reopening the United States after the COVID-19. We have 120,000 deaths in the United States. We were hoping that things would slow down during the summertime, but now we have 23 states that instead of having fewer cases, they have more cases. Now, right now, I'm in Florida, trying to helping my son move, but I'm in Florida, and Florida had 3,500 cases 3 days ago. Yesterday they had, or the day before yesterday, they had 3,800, and then yesterday they had 4,000. So 4,000 new positive cases. The question is, should he have done that? Is he justified? And of course, the scientific community is saying, no, no, no. We need to keep our masks on and wash our hands, and we need to social distance. And the other side is saying, no, no, no. The economy is more important than people's lives. And of course, they can't justify it because they don't like science. They don't believe science. Science does not fit their belief system, and because of that, Trump last night said, "Let's stop testing. Let's stop during his rally." He said, "Let's stop testing. We have too many positives." Well, that doesn't mean you don't have that many cases. That just means you're not finding them. As weird as that is. Early debates in epistemology centered on experience and intuition. Empiricists are people that do experiments, believe knowledge claims are justified by sensory experience alone, and this is known as a posteriori. Posteriori means that what comes after. So you experience something and then you discover the knowledge. That's what a posteriori means. Rationalists, people, if you can hear the thunder, we're having a thunderstorm down here. This is Father's Day, so it's the 21st of June, and we're having a thunderstorm, as exciting as that is. Rationalists believe that knowledge claims are justified by rational intuition, and this is known as a priori. Knowledge, it's knowledge from what is before. In other words, you gain the knowledge and then you prove it. That's what the rationalists how the rationalists believe. The empiricists think that you need to see, you need to experience something and then you test it. And the rationalists say, no, this has always been the way it is, and then we test it. So the knowledge comes after. So the knowledge comes, the testing comes after. The knowledge comes before. Both are essential, of course, the two ideas. Scientific approach is grounded on a set of basic assumptions. One of them is that nature is orderly. As you can see, how orderly that flower is. We can know nature as humans. This year, my daughter is working with the Department of Natural Resources in Iowa. She's having a great time going out in the field. She's measuring trees, and she's looking at wetlands and trying to determine how we need to correct the problem. They have down close to the Mississippi River, they're having problems with the wetlands. They got a lot more rain than they have had in the past. So now all of these wetlands are flooded. And of course, it's killing some of the vegetation. Unfortunately, it's killing the trees, and they don't really want to save the trees. Trees are really important. Anyway, so that's one of the things she's doing. They just had a black bear that walked through the area, as interesting as that is. And of course, everybody wanted to see it. So it caused quite a mess. Now, the interesting thing is they finally got rid of the bear. Well, how did they get rid of the bear? Well, the bear left. It didn't go north. It didn't go south. It actually went east. It swam across the Mississippi River, which is like a mile wide. But this bear was able to swim across the Mississippi River, and now it's Illinois' problem. So I guess the DNR is really happy. Department of Natural Resources is pretty happy. All natural phenomena have natural causes. This is a tsunami. As you can see, the huge wave that's going to come onto the land. It's caused by an earthquake. So it's a natural phenomenon. It has natural causes, and the natural causes in this case, all that water is going to flood this town because of the earthquake that has caused this huge wave that will sweep onto the. Anyway, all natural phenomena have natural causes. Nothing is self-evident. So you have to study things. You need to understand them. You need to experience them in order to figure them out. Knowledge is based on experience. So if you've never seen anything, and of course, this is a picture of Albert Einstein. Einstein was a great theorist, and that's one of the reasons why he was so highly touted, was because he said, mathematically I can prove that this is what's happening. And then he would come up with his theory. And then eventually, of course, we tried to create experiments that proved that he was either correct or incorrect. And of course, most of his theories have been correct. He mathematically proved this, he mathematically proved that. Of course, back in the 16th and 17th centuries, we were using mathematics to prove that the Earth rotated around the sun. And of course, that doesn't agree with the Bible. The Bible doesn't say anything about the Earth rotating around the sun, but of course we can prove this. Back in the 15th century, one of the reasons that Columbus's voyage was so earth-shattering, one of the reasons was because a lot of people thought that the Earth was flat, that it wasn't a ball flying around in space. They thought it was just it was a flat like a piece of paper. And of course, if you can get high enough and you can look out, you can see the curvature of the Earth. But of course, they didn't do that, or they didn't believe it, and since it wasn't in the Bible, people didn't believe it. Knowledge is superior to ignorance. This is something that Socrates said. Most philosophers have said knowing things is more important than not knowing things. And of course, we have a lot of people that all of their knowledge comes from their high school textbooks, or maybe they weren't listening, and they listen to other people, and they come up with these really strange ideas. But of course, I've spent my life reading and studying and doing due diligence with different things, and so I agree that knowledge is superior to ignorance. But there are people that, like one group doesn't believe in science, as weird as that is, as strange as that may seem to somebody who is going to college. If you don't believe that science is real, then you may have a hard time knocking heads with Don Robinson and his crew, the people in the science department. That ought to be really interesting, arguing with Don. Great guy, Don. The goal of the social sciences is to produce a body of reliable and verifiable knowledge that allows us to explain, predict, and understand. Scientific explanation refers to the process of relating a phenomenon to be explained to one or more other phenomena. There are three types of scientific explanations: deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, and abductive reasoning. Deductive explanations move from general to specific principles. So if I thought, what am I? Okay. If I was trying to prove that if you throw a baseball, it will eventually hit the ground, If you throw a ball, it will eventually hit the ground. Or if you shoot a bullet and you shoot it straight, that eventually it will come down. Most bullets will travel for a mile, if I'm not mistaken. This is one of the problems we had in Vietnam. They were using the M14 and the M14 rifle had punching, what we referred to as punching power, because it was a 30-30, if I'm not mistaken, or 30 caliber. Anyway, it was a large round, and it would punch through vegetation. Then they decided that it was too heavy. It didn't hold very many rounds of ammunition. So they decided to go to the M16, which you could put a large banana clip on, and you could use it as a machine gun. But the problem was it was a much smaller round, so it wouldn't punch through the vegetation. Why the hell am I talking about guns? Moving from general to specific principles. So the idea is, well, if you can spray more bullets out there, you're gonna be able to shoot more people. But the problem was that, of course, if there was vegetation in front of you and you were using an M16, despite the fact that you're throwing all these bullets out there, some of them are going to hit vegetation and ricochet off, whereas the M14 had a much larger round, so it would punch through the vegetation. Why are we talking about this? General to specific principles. The idea is that if you put more bullets out there, you're going to kill more people. But it didn't work out that way. It didn't always work out that way. And we did have problems with it because the weapon on the other side was the AK-47, which has a much larger round, and it really can punch through vegetation. So the general idea, deductively, you would say, of course, that the more bullets you put out there, the more people you'll kill. But in this case, of course, because the bullets were smaller and they had a problem punching through the vegetation, when you're fighting in the jungle, the M16 was not a superior weapon to either the M14 or the AK-47, as we found out over and over and over again. Also had a problem with jamming. If it got dirty, then it jammed. And of course, we're talking about fighting in a rainforest, which Vietnam was. So some people had a lot of problems with it. An observed phenomenon is explained by showing it abides by a universal law. When the conclusion follows from the parts or premises of the explanation as dictated by formal logic, it is deductively valid. When the conclusion further follows from the premises that are true, it is deductively sound. Deductive explanations are less common in the social sciences. So if we're talking about depression, depressed people may commit suicide. That is our deductive explanation. Why did this person, and we hear this all the time, why did this person commit suicide? The first thing they say is they were depressed. They potentially don't have any proof of this, but they say that he was depressed. So so the conclusion follows apart the premises of their explanation is deductively valid. So is it deductively valid to say that people that commit suicide are clinically depressed? And the answer is, well, you can't really say that. When the conclusion further follows from the premises that are true, and we would have to look and see if that's true. This is a problem they had in California. In Oakland, they had the individual that hung himself, and they were thinking that it was a lynching, that it wasn't an actual suicide. But of course, his family said, hey, look, he's been depressed for a long time, and he's been talking about suicide for a while. So we don't think that he was lynched. We think that he actually committed suicide. So was it true? And the answer is probably not. And of course but sometimes, when people commit suicide, they really are depressed, and that is the reason they do it. But not always. That's not the way it always works. An example of how deductive reasoning is applied within social science can be found in a 2014 study of whether biases or race or gender shape access to graduate level education. This is something that's huge right now because we are finally dealing with systemic racism in the United States, something that's been going on ever since the beginning of the United States. There are select individuals that are given privileges, and there are certain individuals that have no privileges whatsoever. And of course, for the longest time, this of course had to do with white population and slaves. And then in 1865, of course, all the African Americans were freed from slavery, but did they become equal to white people? And of course, white people would like to pretend that everything was better now and everything was good, but of course we had systemic racism, and it has hit the fan from time to time. Of course, we've had race riots in the 50s. We had race riots in the 60s. We had that massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 1921. All these things are taking place. Um, so, is there systemic racism in graduate level education? A team of researchers used deductive reasoning to hypothesize that due to the prevalence of racism in society, and of course that's a given, until now, and maybe we can cure things, maybe we can take care of things, race would play a role in shaping how university professors respond to prospective graduate students who express interest in their research. By tracking professor responses and lack of responses to imposter students, coded for their race and gender by name, the researchers were able to prove their hypothesis true. They concluded based on their research that racial and gender biases are barriers that prevent equal access to graduate level education across the United States. So if you are a female minority, you've got two strikes against you as far as those individuals are concerned. Those individuals that support this systemic racism, um, so if you're a black female, and strangely enough, this spring, I had a former student from Ashford, who asked me to write her a letter of recommendation. She was trying to get into McGill University up in Canada. She's Canadian, and she wanted to get into McGill, and so I wrote her a letter of recommendation, hoping that she got it. She was a really sweet girl, young lady. She played soccer for the Ashford soccer team. She was a defender. Happiest person, one of the happiest people I've ever met. She's African American, or what am I saying? She's African Canadian. She's of African descent, and I was real pleased to find that she was able to get into the graduate program at McGill. I'm sure it was based completely on my letter of recommendation. But of course, here she is. She's of African descent. She is female. Is she going to get into the program? Now this is really kind of interesting because the program she was trying to get into was a social work, master's in social work. And I don't know. Maybe gender doesn't mean anything in social work. There are more females applying for graduate school in social work than there are males. But of course, she was of African descent. Do they have the same racial problems in Canada that we have in the United States? And of course, they'd like to say no, but the reality is there's a lot of prejudice up there. Maybe not as much. They don't have nearly as many people of African descent as we have in the United States, but they have a relatively large native population, First Nation people, I'm sorry. And there is a great deal of prejudice up there, unfortunately. Inductive reasoning begins with specific observations or real examples of events, trends, or social processes, and it moves to general observations. Using this data, researchers then progress analytically to broader generalizations and theories that help explain the observed cases. This is sometimes called a bottom-up approach because it starts with specific cases on the ground and it works its way up to the abstract level of theory. Once a researcher has identified patterns and trends amongst a set of data, he or she can then formulate a hypothesis to test and eventually develop some general conclusions or theories. An example of inductive reasoning in sociology is Emile Durkheim's study of suicide. Durkheim created a sociological theory of suicide based on his scientific study of suicide rates among Catholics and Protestants. Durkheim found that suicide was more common among Protestants than Catholics, and he drew on this training in social theory to create some typologies of suicide and a general theory of how suicide rates fluctuate according to significant changes in social structures and social norms. And of course, Durkheim was doing his research at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. At that time, of course, Catholicism and Protestantism were far more, were a great deal different than they are today. The Catholic Church was far more dogmatic than it is today, and Protestantism was relatively conservative, as curious as that is. But there were a lot fewer Protestant denominations as there are today. There are a lot of splinter groups that have broken off from the Protestant Church. And of course, if you're Catholic, if you know anything about the Catholic Church, if you commit suicide, you can't be buried in a cemetery, in a Catholic cemetery, because they consider suicide a sin, and therefore you can't be buried in hallowed ground, as they refer to it as hallowed ground. So, seeing that back in the beginning of the 20th century, Catholics were more dogmatic than they are today. They had stronger beliefs. Because of that, of course, you would see far fewer suicides in the Catholic population than you would with the Protestants population. Protestants don't have the same strictures against burying somebody if they commit suicide. So you can be buried in a Methodist or a Baptist or a Church of Christ graveyard, but you can't. If you commit suicide, you can't be buried in a Catholic graveyard. So a lot of suicides are misidentified if the individual is Catholic, as weird as that sounds. So that may have something to do with Emil Durkheim. Durkheim was German, I think. Okay. And Germany, of course, well, you don't know anything about Germany, but I was stationed there for 3 years. In Germany, the Protestant church is a specific church that is being financed by the state, and so are the Catholics. And I think I've talked to some people about this before, but if you go to Germany, you go to a village in Germany, you'll have at one end of the village, you'll have a Protestant church, and it's called a Kirche. It's a Protestant church, so it's probably Lutheran. It might be something else, but it's probably Lutheran. If you go to the other end of the village, there's a Catholic church. So in every village, there's at least 2 churches. And the people who are Catholic, of course, go to the Catholic church. And people that are Protestant go to the Protestant church. And the churches, sometimes they're historical, but if they were destroyed during World War II, they were rebuilt by the government, by the German government. So there's always a Protestant church and a Catholic church. Sometimes they're old, sometimes they're relatively new. The other thing they always have in all villages is a soccer field, and that was built by the state as well, as curious as that is. Abductive or retroductive explanations is used to study hard to reach populations like undocumented immigrants or victims of sex trafficking. Abductive reasoning is a form of logical inference, which starts with an observation or set of observations and then seeks to find the simplest and most likely explanation for the observations. This process yields a plausible conclusion but does not positively verify it. So if we're talking about sex trafficking is tough to discover because, of course, there are men that are prostituting out individuals that they have literally kidnapped. So it's really hard to find these people, to find enough of these people to even talk about. Curiously enough, Jeremiah Barber, Professor Barber, is doing his dissertation on traffic. That's one of the aspects of his research, is trafficked individuals. So wish him luck, and maybe we can stop it. Wouldn't that be great? Examples of abductive explanation. A juror feels the defendant looks like the image of the man on the security camera robbing the bank. The defendant stutters and pauses like he is guilty when answering questions posed by the prosecutor. The juror concludes that he is guilty, but they are not certain. They have made a decision based on their observations, but they are not certain it is a right decision. He just looks like the guy. He sounds like he's lying. This, of course, is a guy that's robbing a gas station. You can see the gas things out there. But we'll pretend he's in a bank and robbing the bank. Prediction is the reverse of the process of explanation. The antecedent observations merely point out that the initial conditions are present. Prediction is based on the argument that if it is known that event X causes event Y and X is present, we can predict that event Y will occur. Therefore, if event X occurs but event Y does not, we can assume that either the statement that X causes Y is untrue, or the antecedent factor X has not been properly identified. When I was talking about suicide and depression, if we have a theory that that event suicide occurs, but suicide occurs anytime that somebody is depressed, and somebody commits suicide, but Y is not present, then we can prove that the statement that X causes Y is untrue. Depression causes suicide. If we can prove that some people commit suicide when they're not depressed, then of course that makes that untrue. Poverty causes criminal behavior, and poverty is present. We can predict that criminal behavior will occur. Of course, this is a problem that the police have had. The assumption is that that poor people are criminals. So when they go into when they get a call that an individual, somebody has robbed the 7-Eleven down the street, where are they going to go looking for the individual that committed the crime? They're going to go into the poor neighborhood looking for them. And of course, this has been a problem. There was a case in Missouri last week where a policeman saw a black man running, and he was looking for a robbery suspect, and he saw a black man running, so he hit the man with his car and broke his leg. And of course, one thing didn't have anything to do with the other. Yes, he was in a poor neighborhood. Yes, he was an African American, but he was not the individual that was the thief. And he hit him. He ran over him. He hit him with his car. He didn't run over him. He hit him with the front of his car and knocked him to the side. The guy started to run away, and he tackled him, and he punched him a couple times. And of course, this goes with the whole George Floyd thing, Black Lives Matter. This is just another indication of systemic racism. Therefore, if someone lives in poverty but they do not participate in criminal behavior, we can assume that either poverty causes criminal behavior is untrue, or the antecedent factor poverty has not been properly identified. You can look at your own reservation. There's a lot of poverty on the reservation. I'm sorry to say that that's true, that there is a lot of poverty, but there's not that much crime. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you're going to steal something, or doesn't mean you're going to be a bootlegger, or doesn't mean you're going to try to push drugs on people. That's just not the case. There are a lot of poor people that don't do anything like that. And of course, there are a lot of African Americans and African American communities, poor African American communities, that do not commit crimes. So this is not true, of course. Understanding, there are two different approaches to understanding. The word verstehen is German for understanding, but in social science, it refers to empathic understanding. Verstehen differentiates between the natural and the social sciences and calls for a different methodology for discoveries in each of the social and natural sciences. Predictive understanding by logical empiricists feel that both the natural and social sciences can be studied the same way. They call for more empirical validity before a conclusion is integrated as scientific knowledge. And of course, that's the way it works in the hard sciences. But you can do that in the hard sciences because things rarely change. Gravity never changes, does to some extent. Of course, if you go up in space, then gravity does change. Things do not fall. Now all of a sudden you're floating around in the air, and that's but that's not on Earth, Okay, so there are absolutes in natural science, but there aren't in the social sciences. Things change. Things are constantly changing in social sciences. Um, in the 1950s, people argued that all mothers should stay home. So if somebody was a working mother, there were very few divorces. It was almost impossible to get a divorce in the 1950s. And then in the 1960s, the laws changed so that we could get divorces. In the 1950s, if you wanted to get a divorce in almost every state, somebody had to have sex with the wrong person, not with their spouse, and still it was difficult to get divorces. In some states, they wouldn't allow divorce at all. It was against the law. But things change over time. So now there are a lot more single parents, and of course, the conservatives in the United States have said what we need to do is outlaw divorce. If we outlawed divorce, there would be a lot fewer problems with our children because there would be fewer single parents, which is an interesting argument, but would it be true? Were we having no problems with children in the 1950s when divorce was against the law? And the answer is, well, we're having problems with select individuals, people that grew up in homes where the parents were always fighting. They grew up with problems that we don't see today, that are different from the problems that we see today. Scientific methodology is a system of explicit rules and procedures upon which research is based and against which claims for knowledge is evaluated. This methodology is tentative, it's open, it's self-critical, and it's self-correcting. Methodology involves explicit rules about communication, thus encouraging criticism and replication. Scientific methodology also demands competence in logical reasoning and analysis. And this is really tough. If we got a very intelligent person that comes up with a theory and he puts together an experiment to prove that theory is true, if his theory is not true, then despite the fact that this is the way science works, you're supposed to try to prove that your ideas are not correct, he's still going to try to convince people that he's right and they're wrong. That just because the experiment didn't work out, it doesn't make it incorrect. And of course, he's supposed to encourage criticism and replication, but most people don't like people to try to prove them wrong. They don't like it. They don't like people to criticize them. But the reality is, of course, has to do with the scientific method. But a lot of scientists are arrogant people. They don't like being told that they're wrong. So, this is a fine idea in theory, but the reality is, and of course, this has to do with what's going on with COVID-19. If you remember, one of the things that President Trump was saying was that hydrochloroquine is a great drug that can cure or keep people from getting COVID-19. There have been studies, and the studies have said, you're wrong, Mr. President, but he won't go back on what he said. You can remember at one point he said that we could use, since disinfectants cleaned or killed COVID-19, maybe we could inject disinfectants into people, and that would cure the COVID-19. But of course, the reality is that's pretty silly, and it doesn't work. The essential tool of the scientific approach, along with factual observations, is logic, the system of valid reasoning that permits drawing reliable inferences from factual observations. Methodology requires intersubjectivity, meaning that knowledge in general and scientific methodology in particular have to be transmissible. Institutionalized rules for methodology. One is communication, the second is reasoning, and the last is intersubjectivity. In other words, you have to look at all aspects of a problem in order to determine if that is what's causing, is what the phenomenon has to do with. So we need to be able to communicate our ideas, we need to be reasonable people, and we need to look at all aspects of a problem. Rules for communication. Questions aid in forming constructive criticisms. Replication of findings is critical. In other words, if I do an experiment and I get one result, what I want to happen is for somebody else to come along and look at my research and say, I can do that, and then they do the research and they prove that I was right. When I was getting my PhD, the research that I did was looking at resilience in native populations. And of course, the native population I was dealing with at the time was a group of individuals up in Montana, up in northern Montana. So the idea was I replicating somebody else's research? And the answer is yeah, to some extent, because there were other individuals who had done resilience studies with native populations in different parts of the country. They didn't use the same instrument that I did. They weren't looking for the same types of results, but they found very similar results to what I did. I was replicating their research. I changed it a little bit, but I showed that native populations are resilient. Now, why is resilience? Why is that important? Proving that people are resilient. Well, the reason that's important to show that a population can recover from a negative situation has to do with the Navajo reservation, with all the horrible things that have happened with COVID-19. My research states that native populations can be resilient. So the idea is that you guys aren't going to tear down all your hogans and move off the reservation because of COVID-19. You're going to recover from this, and you're going to recover just as strong as you were before COVID-19 hit. That's what resilience has to do with. Rules for reasoning. Logical procedures are the foundation of scientific thinking. Reasoning promotes internal consistency to draw reliable inferences based on factual observations. And of course, that's really tough. And that's one of the reasons that we are having such a separation of ideas in the United States. There are some individuals who consider themselves conservative. Conservatives would like to see things reflect more on the past than the present or the future. That we have other individuals who are liberal, and they want progress. They want to keep moving forward. So when we look at these observations, when we are observing what's going on, take Trump's rally last night. He had his rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was listening to Fox News, and then I was listening to CNN, and Fox News was talking about how wonderful it was and how he had all of his points and he was right on topic, and it was a good way to start out your re-election campaign. And then I watched CNN, and they said, my goodness gracious, one of the things that he said, they looked at the negative things about the rally. They said it wasn't a full house like he said it was going to be. He said some negative things. One of them was that he called for less testing of the COVID-19. So they were finding negative things about his rally. They thought it was not a good way to start things out. Of course, they're liberal. The other group, of course, they were only seeing positive things about what happened last night in the rally. Rules of intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity is the sharing of observations and factual information to reach consensus. Logic alone is not enough to explain the truth. There must be mutual agreement in the scientific community to fully validate a conclusion. I've been watching news for 70 years. I'm 70 years old. And I loved watching television when I was a little kid, even though it was brand new. 70 years ago, it was there were only one or two stations. And then ABC came along, so there were three stations. But I used to love to watch television, and we watched of course, I mean, that's all that was on. So you were watching the news a lot, and I didn't mind watching the news because it showed different things. I mean, it was really kind of cool. You got to see film from, from England. You got to see film from Africa. You got to see film not from Asia because there were other things going on. But you got to see film from all around the world, and of course I was very interested. People were more interested in things because there were only two or three ideas out there as far as news was concerned. Then you could read the newspaper. Of course, I couldn't read when I was a kid, or when I was a baby anyway, till I was 5 or 6 years old. And anyway, so what are we talking about? There must be mutual agreement in the scientific community to fully validate a conclusion. So this is part of the problem right now. We've got so many different ideas out there, and each person has an argument. Some people have conspiracy theories that this is what's taking place, and other individuals look at CNN and they say, "Look, this is what's going on," and other people. I mean, if you just watched Fox News, you would think that that Trump did a fantastic job last night. But if you watch CNN, it looks like he dropped the ball. Which one is true? Well, you've got two different. You don't have anybody agreeing on anything. It would be interesting if the newscasters from Fox News and newscasters from CNN had a conversation about these things. But of course, that never takes place. According to Thomas S. Kuhn, science is descriptive and demands conformity to a set methodology for collecting information. There is a distinction between normal science and revolutionary science. Normal science is viewed as the routine verification of the dominant theory in any historical period. Normal science is the routine verification of a theory that is dominant in that time period. And of course, things change over time. Once upon a time, in psychology, Freudian psychoanalysis was the dominant idea. It is the normal science of the psychological sciences from the middle of the 19th century until probably the 1950s. In the 1950s, we started getting conflicting ideas. We started getting other ways of dealing with psychological problems. So if you watch a movie from the 1930s or 1940s, potentially, and they talk about psychology, they're probably talking about Freudian psychology and Freudian ideas. But in the 1950s, we had all of these different theorists that came out with new ideas. They were saying Freud was not completely accurate. They were saying that sometimes they said he was completely wrong. Feminists didn't like what he said about women. He talked about sex too much. They wanted to deal with what the problem is right here. We can see the problem is this. Why in the world do we have to talk about how the person feels about their mother, or how the individual feels about sex? So things changed. We had Rogerian therapy, then we had Ellis and Beck. So then we got the cognitive theories, rational emotive therapy. We had a lot of different ideas, and that's right now cognitive therapy is what people are doing. So normal science in the 1940s and 1950s may have been Freudian, but today, of course, it's cognitive psychology, or it's cognitive rational emotive therapy, or it's cognitive therapy. And all of these are different from Freudian therapy. Freudian therapy takes much longer, and cognitive theory, of course, and cognitive therapy takes much less time. Rogerian therapy. When I went to college in the what year are we talking about? The 1970s, and I started studying psychology. I studied Rogerian therapy because that was the norm of the time, and eventually we moved away from Rogerian therapy to cognitive therapy, which is not the same as Rogerian or Freudian therapy. So he's right. Things change over time. We have different ideas. A paradigm is a distinct set of concepts or thought patterns, including theories, research methods, postulates, and standards for what constitutes legitimate contributions to a field. Paradigms have two defining characteristics: unprecedented so as to draw a group of adherents away from competing theories, open-ended enough to allow for this group to redefine problems with this new theory. And of course, that's what happened with Freudian therapy. Was the Regier type of therapy, and up until the 1950s, and then people started adhering and arguing with Rogers, or arguing with Freud, using Rogers' theories. And of course, eventually, of course, we redefine the problems. Today, if you go to Europe, you will probably, and you need psychological therapy, you'll probably get Freudian therapy. But in the United States, of course, now it's cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And you'll see CBT all the time because almost all your textbooks talk about CBT. How do we treat depression? CBT. How do we treat obsessive compulsive disorder? CBT. How do we treat PTSD? CBT. Paradigms closely relate to the idea of normal science. In contrast to normal science, Kuhn views revolutionary science as the abrupt development of a rival paradigm that can be accepted only gradually by a scientific community. Paradigm transformation is what is revolutionary in science. Sorry about that. This is an interesting idea. I had a friend when I was in the service. He was a geologist, and he had studied geology before the plate theory came along. So when he studied geology, it was using a different theory. It was using a theory that didn't have anything to do with tectonic plates. Now, of course, we see the Earth as covered with these different plates, and sometimes they will shift. And when they shift, it causes an earthquake or it causes a volcano to erupt. But we see them as these giant plates that are floating around, banging into each other. Usually they're pressing right up against each other, but sometimes these things move, and when they move, then we have an earthquake or we have a volcano. Well, he didn't learn that. He didn't learn that theory. He learned the old theory. We have new paradigms, and now it's the tectonic plates. And since he didn't learn the new paradigm, he has a bachelor's degree in geology that he can't use, unfortunately. And he complained about this all the time. Karl Popper challenges the science is and should be an open society in which no dominant paradigm is ever sacred. And of course, that's tough because we get people that are relatively dogmatic. This is I'm going to tell you a secret that that nobody's going to tell. Well, probably, I don't know. Maybe they'll tell you. The problem with knowledge, the problem with having a master's degree or a PhD, is that you were educated whenever you were educated. I got my PhD in 2012, and I studied from 2001 until 2012, working on my master's and my PhD. The problem is, and this may be a problem that I have, and and you should tell me if I have this problem, my knowledge ended in 2012, or potentially it did. So the ideas that I'm teaching you potentially are at least 8 years old, potentially. Now, I try to keep up with things. I try to have different ideas, but sometimes I may get stuck in the past. So if you're dealing with somebody that got their PhD in 1989, then potentially their knowledge base stopped in 1989. Now, of course, if you have a PhD, you're supposed to read journals and get new ideas. You're supposed to read material in your subject area so that you learn new things. But it doesn't always happen. Some people are stuck in the past. And of course, we become dogmatic as PhDs, and potentially we have ideas that don't exist anymore. So I had a friend who was a PhD, and he was teaching psychology, and this was in 2011, or was it 2012? Obama got rid of the concept of mentally retardation. Of course, the APA didn't change that until the DSM-5, which came out in 2013. They said it wasn't mental retardation anymore. It was intellectual deficit or intellectual disability. So we couldn't use the term medical or mentally retarded. But of course, the textbooks from before 2013 or before 2012, when Obama signed the legislation taking it out of everybody's archives, out of the archives, before that, people used the term. It was a legitimate term, and that's what you used. Well, I had a colleague that refused to change his nomenclature. He would not change to intellectual disability or intellectual deficit. He still talked about people being mentally retarded. And of course, people stopped listening to him. He sounded stupid, which is probably not a term that I should use. The reality is, of course, mental retardation was brought in because people were calling people morons and idiots. That's the term, that's the medical term that they use for people with an intellectual deficit or intellectual disability. They use those terms, and they replaced it with mental retardation. For 20 or 30 years, if you were nice to people, you didn't refer to them as an idiot or a moron, you referred to them as mentally retarded. And then, of course, in 2012 and 2014 or 2013, the psychological community, hopefully, changed the term to intellectual disability. But he didn't change, and he sounded pretty bad. So the reality is things are constantly changing. So if you're a scientist, if you have a PhD, you should constantly be reading and finding out new things. Science is a permanent state of revolution, and that's the way it should be, but it's not always the way it is. People have knowledge, and they think that that's absolute. We have a president that seems to be stuck in the 1980s. His nomenclature comes from the 1980s. There's going to be an election in November. The individual that might replace him, he may get reelected, but the individual that might potentially replace him is older than he is. So he's stuck in the 1980s. So it should be really curious seeing how things might change. The research process consists of 7 principal stages. And of course, this is one of the things that we're going to be doing. What I want you to do is to find a problem that you'd like to do research on. You need to define that problem. Then you need to construct a hypothesis dealing with that problem. You need to come up with a research design. You need to decide what type of measurement that you need. You need to decide how you're going to collect your data. You don't really need to decide about data analysis or coming up with the generalizations about your results, because we're not really going to be doing the research. Eventually, of course, when you go through Christine's class, Dr. Ami's class, she's going to want you to do research, and it's going to be research on the reservation. So this is a good way of coming up with a plan, with a plan for doing research on the reservation. The most characteristic feature of the research process is its cyclic nature. It's always the same. Everybody does research in the same form, in the same manner. The research process is also self-correcting and represents a rational reconstruction of scientific practice. And that is the end of chapter 1. Sorry that I'm so long-winded. It's been a month since I've actually done any lectures, so I'm a little bit long-winded. I've also been, I've also been cloistered in my home, sheltering in place for an extended length of time. I haven't been around people, so at least I get to talk to people. If I'm not making any sense, you need to tell me, geez, is that English you're speaking? Anyway, okay, so this is chapter 2. Chapter 2 deals with conceptual foundations of research. Concept is an abstraction representing an object, a property of an object, or a certain phenomenon. Concepts serve a number of important functions in social science research. They are the foundation of communication. They introduce a point of view, a way of looking at empirical phenomena. They are means for classification and generalization. They serve as components of theories and thus of explanations and predictions. Some common concepts in social science include social status. What's your social status? Bureaucracy. And of course, we're talking about the government. We're talking about, golly, you guys deal with the bureaucracy on the Navajo Nation all the time. Community. Do you live in Kienta? Do you live in Saley? Do you live in Chinle? Do you live in on Black Mesa? I guess. I think. I don't know. Anyway, do you live in Tuba City? Do you live in Crown Point? How about Through? I think they pronounce it Through or something like that. Anyway, Ganado, your community, your cohort, so the people that you went to high school with, the people that you're in college with right now, those are all your cohorts. And I have the same cohorts that you have, but of course my cohorts are not on the Navajo reservation. Well, they are now because my colleagues, I have friends who teach at the college. I have friends and acquaintances, of course. Those are my cohorts. I would consider Professor Barber a cohort. We have 2 new professors coming in. Professor Begay and Professor Russ are coming in. Dr. Begay and Dr. Russ. Those are my cohorts. The people I graduated from high school with are my cohorts. The people I graduated from my undergraduate college are my cohorts. The people I served with in the military are my cohorts. I would consider people who are military as my cohorts. So if you are a veteran, I served 12 years in the United States Air Force, back from 1971 through 1973, 1983. So I would consider you my cohort. Anyway, and relative deprivation. Concepts serve several functions. They provide a common language. They provide perspective or a way to look at phenomena. They allow classification and ordering of observations and experiences. Concepts are components of theories. They define a theory's content and attributes. Clarity and precision is the usage of concepts are achieved by definitions. 2 types of definitions are important in social science research: conceptual definitions and operational definitions. Conceptual definitions describe concepts by using other concepts. So when we're talking about Freudian psychology, so how in the world do I explain to you how do I conceptually define Freudian psychology or Freudian psychoanalysis? I would have to use other concepts. It's the idea of that your past has something to do with your feelings of today. Feelings. These are all concepts. I have to describe. What is depression? All of these things are different concepts, and of course, we're describing how you would deal with that in different contexts using the description of other concepts. Operational definitions identify a set of procedures required to study a phenomenon that has already been conceptually defined. So I was talking about resilience before. So how do we define resilience? Well, resilience is kind of a new concept. It's only been around for 20 or 25 years. Before that, they referred to it as hardiness. Is hardiness exactly the same thing as resilience? No, resilience, we know what resilience is today because we have tried to measure it, or we have been able to measure it. We have come up with different surveys, different techniques for measuring resilience. So if I'm in a tornado and blows down my house, and they film me on television, am I crying or am I trying to pick things up? Am I as happy as I was before? Well, now I don't have a house, but at least I'm alive. That would be my point of view. But a lot of people, oh, my house is gone, my house is gone. I was watching something last night on a fire. And of course, you guys are having fires in Arizona. They're mostly down south, over in the White Mountains. They're around snowflakes, so Marius has to be careful, I guess. They're also around Tucson. And Dr. Russ is from around Tucson someplace. So there's fires out there. And this individual is saying, oh, my house is destroyed by a fire. I'm so sad. I don't know what I'm going to do. I didn't know I had such feelings for a house. And then they showed another individual and they said, wow, that fire came through really, really fast. It destroyed my house, but boy, I was able to get my family out. And I was able to save all my dogs and my cats. I'm so happy that I'm still alive. Two different ideas of that's resilience. So which one is showing resilience? Well, the second one, of course, is showing more resilience than the first one. The first one is breaking down, ready to quit life because their house burned down. Like houses are more important than lives. Conceptual definitions consist of primitive and derived terms. Primitive terms are terms on which there is a consensus about their meaning. Usually their meaning is conveyed by indicating examples. Derived terms are terms that can be defined by the use of primitive terms. Conceptual definitions are neither true nor false and must be assessed within the context of the theory in which they are found. What makes one conceptual definition better than another is the clarity, the coherence, and the applicability of the definition within the theoretical context. So if I had a definition of resilience that was, you're okay, and somebody else had a definition, they measure a select way on a survey, they have a certain level of happiness. If we give them a depression scale, they score very low on the depression scale. In other words, they aren't depressed. That's a stronger definition than, they're okay. Treating concepts as if they were the phenomena they represent is called the fallacy of reification. Now, one of the things you're going to learn about me as you go through classes with me is that I like words. And I like terms like this, fallacy of reification. My goodness gracious. Reification means taking an idea and giving it solid properties, such as a wedding ring being the reification of a couple's love. Another is the American flag. And this is one of the things that came out in Trump's speech last night. The NFL is thinking of not playing the national anthem before a football game. Because before they were punishing people for kneeling during the national anthem, but now that Black Lives Matter, now that we've had this social upheaval over systemic racism, they are talking about everybody kneeling during the national anthem. And Trump doesn't like that. He wants everybody to stand at attention and salute, which is not something that you're allowed to do unless you're a veteran. Only veterans can salute the flag and somebody under arms and somebody who's in the military right now. George W. Bush signed it into law that veterans could salute during the national anthem, as weird as that sounds. But what is the flag? Is it just a piece of cloth, or does it have deeper meaning? Well, if you think it has deeper meaning, then that's probably a fallacy of reification. If I lost my wedding ring, it wouldn't mean that I didn't love my wife and that I'm not married anymore. The ring doesn't mean anything. And of course, you don't even have to get married to feel like you belong to this person for the rest of your life. So, and that is the fallacy of reification. You don't have to be married to be with somebody, and you don't have to, the ring isn't all that important. As a matter of fact, who was I talking to? Russians don't have wedding rings. I was talking to somebody about wedding rings, and she was saying, well, she didn't have a ring on, so I thought she wasn't married. And that doesn't have anything to do with the Russians. Sometimes they will wear wedding rings, but they have to be more westernized. And not all of Russia is in Western Europe. Part of it is the western part of it is, of course, but the rest of it is in Asia, and of course they don't always have the same ideas that the Europeans have because they're not a European. Concepts do not truly exist in the world. They are abstract ideas meant to symbolize phenomena, and of course that would be the fallacy of reification. If I burn the American flag, I've burned hundreds of American flags. I'll tell you about it in just a second. But if I burn the American flag in protest, have I injured the United States? They tried to pass laws that said if you burn an American flag, it's a felony and you should be put in prison. But of course, that law never passed because of the fallacy of reification. Does the American flag, it is symbolic and it does mean things. And when you see the American flag, you should respect it. Unless, of course, you're at a protest and you're kneeling because of Black Lives Matter. But, should I go to jail just because I did something? I used to work in a cemetery, and one of my jobs was getting rid of the old and frayed flag. And, of course, the proper way of getting rid of an American flag is not to throw it away. You don't want to throw it away because, you don't want, rats moving in and making a nest out of the American flag. So if you find an American flag that is torn up, then what you're supposed to do is burn it. And since I worked in the cemetery and we would put the flags out on all the holidays, the flags got beat up pretty good. And of course, if I found a flag that needed to be destroyed, or a flag, we had 48-star flags. And of course, in 1960, in 1960, Alaska was admitted to the Union. 1961, Hawaii was admitted to the Union. So, we had the 49-star flag for a year, and then we had the 50-star flag, which we have now. But if we found an old flag, we were supposed to destroy it, and the way you destroy it is to burn the flag. So I burned hundreds of flags at the cemetery. It's one of the largest national cemeteries in the United States. That's where I worked, burying people. All veterans. That was my job. I buried people that died, and they had to be veterans to get into the cemetery, or their spouses. An example of a complex and abstract concept would be the definition of alienation. Melvin Seaman observed that literature defined alienation as a sense of the splitting asunder of what was once held together, the breaking of the seamless mold in which values, behavior, and expectations were once cast into interlocking forms. This is the concept of alienation. Alienation. If I were going to measure alienation on the Navajo reservation, how would I do it? I would find a survey that measured alienation. And this would be my definition. And this is the definition from literature. It's not the definition from psychology. It's not the definition from physics. It's not the definition from biology. It's a definition from literature. And as you can see, it's fairly poetic. Anyway, this concept of alienation, which is an interesting concept because I've read a lot of books dealing with alienation. Franz Kafka, Albert Camus, they were all writers that dealt with this concept. Given this conceptualization, Seaman called for 5 separate conceptual definitions for alienation: powerlessness, meaninglessness, normlessness, isolation, and self-estrangement. Alienation. So if we look at this picture of this man, is he alienated from society? His job is to tighten those bolts and to continue tightening those bolts. Powerlessness, the expectation of individuals that their behavior cannot bring about or influence the outcomes they desire. In other words, no matter what they do, things are going to stay the same. And that's what this picture theoretically signifies, the fact that I have no power. I'm powerless to change anything. Meaninglessness, the perception by individuals that they do not understand decisions made by others or events taking place around them. And of course, that's what this picture signifies. Meaninglessness. I typed meaninglessness into Google and I asked for Google images, and this is one of the pictures that came up. What does this mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything. We are putting ideas into people's heads, but is there any meaning behind it? And of course, if you've read the book 1984, that deals with this whole concept of the fact that you weren't allowed to have ideas that were different from the state, and sometimes the state's ideas didn't make any sense. Normlessness, the expectation that socially unacceptable behavior, such as cheating, is now required to achieve certain goals. The steroid era in baseball, where a lot of people were taking steroids. The pitchers started taking steroids, so now in order for the hitters to be able to catch up to the baseball, they had to take steroids too. So the idea was that everybody's cheating. Before it was steroids, it was amphetamines. They were going out on the field, they were taking their greenies, or they're taking their white crosses or black crosses, and they're going out on the field and they were playing baseball. And they did this every day. Everybody was cheating. Is that okay? In today's society, if you plagiarize, that's cheating, and that shouldn't be allowed. But now, if I give you a test, then potentially you can type it all into the computer, and you can ask the question, and potentially you'll come up with the right answer. Is cheating socially acceptable now? If it allows you to achieve your goals. Well, if you cheat all your life, then potentially you're not going to have the knowledge base to be able to do anything, because you cheat in order to get information. You don't know anything. Would you like to go to a doctor that had cheated all the way through medical school, that put everything, he's got a computer on his computer. He can just ask Google about this guy's got a rash, and it starts at his knees and it goes up to his elbows. What is this? And of course, Google will say, oh, he'll give him a list of problems. So he doesn't have to know anything, potentially. Isolation, the feeling of separateness that comes from rejecting socially approved values and goals. And of course, this picture is a picture of people that don't want to sit around that lady, unfortunately. When I was in college, one of the things that happened to me when I was a freshman was that I was socially ostracized. And the reason I was ostracized was because I didn't sing the school song properly. And that was one of the things you did. So they socially ostracized me. I wasn't allowed to go to anything on campus, any social things on campus. Well, I could still participate in athletics. And of course, at the time, I was running cross country. I hated cross country. Didn't want to run that far. But in the spring, I ran track. So as a freshman, I broke all these records, and of course, they kind of liked that. They liked me breaking records. They didn't like me not singing the school song. So I was socially ostracized for 4 years. So one of the things that happened was that when we had our awards dinners, we couldn't have them on They couldn't have them on campus. They had to move it off campus because I was receiving awards. 2 of the years, my junior and senior years, I was the captain of the team. Yet they couldn't have the ceremony on the. I know, it's kind of silly. Anyway, I was socially ostracized. So this is me, except my hair wasn't that long. Self-estrangement, the denial of the image of the individual's self as defined by the immediate group or society at large. And of course, self-estrangement, it's me not wanting to be with other people. And of course, that sheltering in place and the isolation that we felt over the last 3 or 4 months, people may feel like this. Here I am down in Florida, fun place, lots of things to do. Lots of places to go, lots of restaurants. I haven't even put on my shoes in a week. I've just been sitting in the corner of my son's apartment, his two-bedroom apartment. Um, is this me? Is this a picture of me? Well, potentially. But I'm sheltering in place. Like the number of cases, COVID-19 cases in Arizona and Florida are skyrocketing right now. So I'm a little antsy about going out in public, especially down here. I mean, there's a lot of people. Yesterday they had 4,000 new positives in Florida. Lots of people in Florida, but I don't want to run into any of those guys that are sick because nobody's got on a mask. Seaman and colleagues converted the 5 basic definitions of alienation into a series of questionnaire items, operational indicators, that could be answered by survey respondents. Suppose your town was considering a regulation that you believe to be unjust and harmful. What do you think you could do? If the subject responded nothing, then the surveyors categorized the answer as feeling powerless. Seaman and his colleagues were able to transform the concept of alienation from the conceptual level to the observational level. Concepts have both conceptual and operational components. Social scientists face 2 issues when trying to align the 2 levels: congruence and theoretical import. Congruence refers to the agreement between the conceptual and the operational components. Issues of congruence between conceptual and operational definitions constitute an important challenge to social scientists. So I have an idea. I have this idea of isolation. So that's the conceptual part. Now I need to figure out how this works. I need to find out a way to indicate that somebody is isolated or whatever. I can't remember what I was talking about. But that's the concept is one thing, but now you need to figure out resilience. The concept of resilience is that you recover from a trauma. But what do I do? Do I beat somebody up and see if they recover from it to show that they have resilience? So the concept is one thing, but the operation is something totally different. I need to be able to show resilience. And of course, what I did in my own research was I found a survey that measured resilience. The U.S. Census Bureau surveys every American every 10 years to determine what race and ethnicity they are. Operationalizing race in this manner is problematic, as social scientists see race as an idea constructed historically via economic, political, and cognitive machinations. Thus, there is an issue between operational definitions, categorizing race, and conceptual definitions, understanding that race is actually subjective. So what is being white? What does that mean? What is being Asian? What is being native? Should we make each different tribe in the United States, native tribe, should we make each and every one of these individuals a different race? Jewish people consider themselves a race. They consider the Jewish race. So these people, they are Jewish, and they consider that a separate race. But when we identify them on the census, we take Jewish people and we categorize them as white. But Jewish people don't consider themselves the same as everybody else. Remember, if you know anything about the Jewish religion, they consider themselves the chosen people. And for that reason, all people who are not Jewish are different. So Europeans are different, Caucasians, people who you identify as Caucasians are different. People from Africa are not the same as Jewish people. And it has to do with religion. It has to do with religious identity. So there were a lot of people, you guys don't, you're Dene. You don't consider yourself the same as Apaches, like Garth was saying. Garth lumped you together with Apaches because you have the same language group. But you don't consider yourselves the same as those people, despite the fact you speak the same language that they do. Are all people that speak English, are they white? And the answer would probably be, well, of course it's no. It doesn't make any sense. So the one thing is conceptual, and the other is operational, as confusing as that is. Some concepts cannot be defined operationally. They cannot be observed either directly or indirectly. Things like ego, how arrogant are you? The Oedipus complex is a concept, a Freudian concept that little boys desire to control their mothers. That's the idea, and they have to get over this because they've got their dad, and their dad is bigger and stronger than they are, and since they can't beat up their dad, since they can't dominate their father, they have to give up the idea of dominating their mother. That's the Oedipus complex. And eventually, of course, they identify with the father, and that's how they become masculine, by identifying with their father because they cannot they cannot dominate their mother. Dialectical materialism, subconscious, the subconscious, marginal utility, public interest. None of these concepts can be quantified. I mean, you can't, how much ego do you have? How strong was your Oedipus complex? Your subconscious, how much do you have in your subconscious? I don't know, because it's not conscious, it's subconscious, it's below conscious. I just put this in here. I guess that's kind of racist at this point. No lives matter. That's kind of a negative thing to say. The whole Black Lives Matter movement is a very positive thing. But of course, I was around when we were saying things like "black is beautiful" and individuals. I remember talking to someone when I was young, and I was talking about, there was a lady on television. I can't remember who she was. Anyway, she was African American. I was saying, "Wow, she is really gorgeous." And this lady says, it was my mother-in-law. She was saying, "Well, she's not beautiful because she's black, and black is ugly." So there was this idea that unless you were white, you were ugly back then. This was back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. And of course, I punched her in the nose. No, I didn't. Anyway. But of course, the whole idea behind Black Lives Matter is the fact that they've been systemic racism has kept them from being able to be successful. And we have, as a white person, I have to fight this. I have to live with this because Black lives really do matter, and that's really important. This is, I don't know why I put this in here. I guess I put it in March. According to the orthodox operational approach, a concept that cannot be defined operationally should not be used in scientific research because it can't be verified. Without an operational definition, scientists cannot communicate. Scientists cannot replicate one another's research because they aren't certain that they are observing the same phenomenon. And of course, that's what happened with resilience. If I used a different measurement for resilience, then I really wasn't communicating with somebody who didn't want to use that or didn't think that survey was accurate. I was only communicating with people that had used that, and this was relatively common at this point. Interestingly, it was Wagnald is the lady that wrote the survey. She was a nurse, and she was working in a retirement community. So she measured resilience by what she saw in the elderly people that she was working with, and she saw what was resilient. Obviously, what worked for these individuals, and she put that into her survey. As curious as that is, and I thought this was fairly accurate. The interesting thing was that she lived about 150 miles away from me in Montana. She was living over by Billings. Anyway, and I called her and I asked her if I could use it and was it accurate? Was everything published? And she said, no, of course it's not. I said, do you have anything that isn't unpublished? And she said, I can't release that information. What's wrong with you, you idiot? Anyway, however, most social scientists hold that they should evaluate scientific concepts not only in terms of observability, but also in terms of their theoretical importance. Theoretical import refers to some concepts acquiring meaning only within the context of the theory in which they are found. And of course, that is kind of true. if we're talking about cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology is not the same, it's the same as the psychology that I learned. And the reason it's not the same is because it has different, it's a different concept, and it uses psychological terms in a different context. They're talking about the brain, they're talking about conscious thought, and of course, I was dealing with subconscious thought. So, the two arguments were really kind of interesting. I have worked with a cognitive psychologist who said he didn't believe in mental illness. He said it was just a misconception, is what. So I asked him, it was right after the DSM-5 came out, and I said, I have the DSM-5 if you want to borrow it or look at it. And he said, I will never ask you to borrow that book because I don't believe in mental illness, as strange as that is. Anomie is a Greek word meaning lawless. Modern usage of anomie stems from Durkheim's theory of the breakdown between a society and its citizen. Anomie is the feelings of normlessness from the lack of usual social or ethical standards in an individual or group, especially after the collapse of a government. We've seen this over and over again. We saw this in Germany after World War I. We saw this in Russia. We saw this in the old Soviet Union when the Soviet Union collapsed and it became Russia. For a while, there was lawlessness. There was nobody trying to control things, and because of that, anarchy reigned, and money didn't mean anything. They started using different currencies other than the ruble. It was really kind of interesting to watch. Of course, people were dying, people were starving to death. Alcoholism became rampant. It was really kind of well, as a social scientist, I found it really fascinating to watch all of these things. That and the fact that, of course, I was in the Cold War. I was in the military from 1971 through 1983. Vietnam. There was all kinds of crazy stuff was going on. The communists were trying to invade this country and trying to invade that country, and of course we were telling them, no, you can't, get out of there. So we were facing off with these people all around the world. And one of the problems that happened during that time, I was in Europe from 1979 to 1982. Iran was being run by the Shah of Iran, and he was thrown out in 1978. Or was it 1979? Anyway, we were afraid that the Russians were going to move in because the Soviet border was right against Iran, and we were afraid that they were going to invade Iran, and there was nothing we could do because we had been kicked out of Iran by the new revolutionary government. This is one of the reasons why Iran is so much trouble as far as we're concerned, because we haven't had normalized relations with them since the Shah was removed, since he abdicated. He actually was sick, and he came to the United States. We did surgery, but there was no way to. The cancer was inoperable, and he died. Anyway, so a lot of things have taken place. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, of course, I had fought the Cold War. I'd faced off the Russian tanks in Europe at that time. If you wanted to go to Berlin, Berlin was isolated in East Germany. So in order to get there, there was one road and there was one train track that went to Berlin from Western Germany, from West Germany, or you could fly in. You could either fly in, go by train, or go by car. And I was playing softball in Europe at the time, and we played in Berlin 3 times. And one time we flew in, and one time we went by troop train to Berlin. And the third time I took my kids, and we drove to Berlin, and that was kind of cool. I was just talking to my son. I'm here with my son, and we had Chinese food the other day, and the first time we had ever eaten Chinese food was in Berlin, as weird as that sounds. First place you eat Chinese food is in Berlin. And of course, we're talking about enemy, their lawlessness. Nobody's in charge. This is Minneapolis. This is a picture of Minneapolis. Of course, Seattle has that area that that the protesters won't allow anybody to come into unless you're a protester, which is kind of interesting. Scientific concepts are to be evaluated with reference to their observability as well as their theoretical import, their contribution to the theory in which they are embedded. Concepts gain empirical meaning from operational definitions and theoretical meaning from the theory in which they are employed. So, we've talked about different types of theories. Resilience, I was able to empirically show that people had resilience, and then it became theoretical. American Indians, well, the ones on the northern plains anyway, have resilience. That was what I was proving. I can't say anything about anybody else because I only tested people on the northern plains. So I just tested this group right here in Blaine County and in, I can't remember the other county, it was right next door, but there were some natives that lived off the reservation in those two counties, and those are the ones that I was looking at. One of the most important functions of empirical research is its contribution to the development and refinement of theory. Theory enhances the goals of science. Unfortunately, social scientists have a difficult time defining just what a theory is, and of course, this is a problem. So if I theorize that American Indians are resilient, if that's my theory, they've gone through all of these traumas. The traumas go all the way back to the first incursions of Europeans. It has gone on for hundreds of years, and they are resilient because they are still here. If that's my theory, then I would give select individuals. I would give individuals the test for resilience, and I would prove that they are resilient. It's interesting, I keep talking about American Indians and resilience. One of the pieces of research that I looked at to show that I could do this was a Dene person had done a resilience study, and he showed that his population was resilient using the same techniques that I was going to use. He used a different instrument, but that was one of the that's one of the pieces of research that I used to show that American Indian, you can measure the resilience of American Indians. My measurement, the measurement that I used was more universal. And because of that, he showed that American Indians in the Southwest, he was talking about the Dene population, that they were resilient because he used this resilience measurement. And I used a more universal measurement showing that another group of American Indians were resilient. And so I used some research coming from the Navajo Nation. Scientists can only accept a theory when its methodology and practical applications are explicit and credible. Theory is not philosophy. Moral philosophies state value judgments and are not provable, but are opinion. Scientific theories are concepts that reflect empirical phenomena. And this is important. I mean, we can theorize about these things all we want. We can create philosophies. We can use value judgments to say that say American Indians are the most beautiful people on Earth. This is my philosophy. Why? Because they always have a tan. If darker skin is, white people are always trying to tan themselves. I've got a pretty good tan going right now. Of course, it's ashing over here on my arm. But the idea is that the darker complexioned you are, up to a point, of course, that wasn't very nice, was it? But the darker complexioned you are, the more beautiful you are. And that could be my philosophy, that could be my theory. Now, how in the world am I going to prove beauty? Beauty is something you can't measure. We can only ask people's opinion. It is only a value judgment. So it's not scientific to even talk about beauty. The classification of theories was developed by Talcott Parsons and Edward A. Shills, and they determined that there are four distinct levels of theory: ad hoc classificatory systems, taxonomies, conceptual frameworks, and theoretical systems. I'm going to explain those all right now. As you can see, the guy on the bottom is Shills, and the guy on the top is Parsons. I like to show people's pictures because, geez, I mean, they're the ones that came up with these ideas. And maybe someday you'll see somebody that looks like that, and you go, oh, that's Talcott Parsons. And that guy with all the wrinkles, that's Edward Shills. Ad hoc classificatory systems consist of an arbitrary set of categories constructed in an effort to organize and summarize empirical observations. Ad hoc means this proves this shows this. It arranges observations in a way that is convenient. It is the lowest level of theorizing. A simple Likert scale is an example of an ad hoc classificatory system. And a Likert scale is one that starts with strongly agree and it goes to strongly disagree. As you can see, there are different aspects along here. You can use a 5-point Likert scale or a 7-point Likert scale. The original Likert scale was a 5-point scale. So you can strongly agree, you can strongly disagree, or you can be neutral, that's right in the middle, or you can agree or disagree. That's the Likert scale. And Likert, of course, was the guy that came up with this idea. A taxonomy consists of a system of logically related categories constructed to fit empirical observations in such a way that relationships among the categories can be defined. Taxonomies perform two important functions in social science research: to provide an orderly schema for classification and description, a shopping list. It summarizes and describes descriptive studies, but taxonomies do not provide explanations. And as you can see, we're looking at the panther. This is the panther, and we are looking at how they have categorized it. This is a taxonomic categorization. It's an animal. It has a spinal cord. It's a chordata. It is a mammal. It has fur. It eats meat. It's a carnivore. It is one of the cats. It's a Felidae. It's a large cat. It's a Panthera, and of course, its species is Panthera pardus. And of course, this is a taxonomy. It goes from general to specific. Conceptual frameworks consist of descriptive categories being systematically placed within a broad structure of explicit as well as assumed propositions. These frameworks are then used to form propositions that are scientifically tested, and they can be later used to provide explanations and predictions for vast numbers of empirical observations. A conceptual framework is used to illustrate what you expect to find through your research, including how the variables you are considering might relate to each other. And the variables I used when I was looking at resilience, I was trying to find what causes resilience. Are females more resilient than males? Are more educated people more resilient than less educated people? Does trauma, the level of trauma that you have experienced, does that lessen your amount of resilience? Wait a minute. Does your amount of your culture, the amount of culture that you have, does the more culture that you have make you more resilient? Those were all of my variables. I used age, I used education, I used gender, I used level of trauma, and I used level of cultural awareness. Now remember, this is an American Indian population. So I looked at those 5 variables. That was my conceptual framework. I looked at those 5 variables, and my dependent variable was resilience. My independent variables were the 5 things I just mentioned. And only one of those things affected resilience. And that one thing that affected resilience was your level of culture. If you adhered to your culture, then you tended to be more resilient, as interesting as that is. The other thing that I found was that whether you had a lot of trauma in your life or very little trauma in your life, it didn't mean anything. It didn't affect your level of resilience. Now, if we look at all other populations, we look at if we look at white America, if we look at Europeans, if we look at Africans, the more trauma they've gone through, the lower their resilience level. Everybody else. But this was the third piece of research of American Indians looking at trauma and resilience that showed that trauma did not affect resilience level, as weird as that sounds. So only in this population do we see that. If you go to Appalachia, if you go to New York City, if you go to Chicago, go to Los Angeles, what you find is the more trauma somebody's been through, the less likely that they will be resilient. But in the native population, in 3 different studies, one done in the Southwest, one done in the Northern Plains, that was my research, and one done down in Oklahoma, what they discovered was whether they had experienced lots of trauma or no trauma at all, they had the same level of resilience. And all 3 studies showed that the level of cultural awareness built their resilience. It increased their resilience. Conceptual frameworks belong to a higher level of theorizing than taxonomies. This is an example of a conceptual framework. You can look at that later. A theoretical system is the highest level of theory. A theoretical system is a combination of taxonomies with conceptual frameworks. A theoretical system relates descriptions, explanations, and predictions in a highly systematic manner. A theoretical system is comprised of propositions that are interrelated in a way that permits some propositions to be derived from others. A theoretical system is comprised of a set of concepts that include both abstract and measurable components. An example of Durkheim's theory is Durkheim's theory of suicide. In any social group, the suicide rate varies directly with the degree of individualism. Who's more individualistic, Protestants or Catholics? As it turns out, Protestants are more individualistic than Catholics. And of course, if you take cultural psychology, this is one of the main aspects of cultural psychology. So if you live in a collectivist society like China or Japan or some of the native populations around the world, they're very collectivistic. Those individuals are less individualistic than other places. The 2 most individualistic places on Earth seem to be France as a country and the United States as a country. The degree of individualism varies with the incidence of Protestantism. Some Protestant religions force you to be like everybody else in the religion. Others are more free. Some churches, you only think about the religion on Sunday or Christmas or Easter. And you don't really think about it the rest of the time. It's not that important. But if you're Catholic, you can go to Mass every day. If you're Protestant, if you want to go to church, you're going to have to wait until probably Sunday and maybe Wednesday if they have Bible study. Therefore, the suicide rate varies with the incidence of Protestantism, deduced from propositions 1 and 2. The incidence of Protestantism in Spain is low. Therefore, the suicide rate of Spain is low, deduced from propositions 3 and 4. And that is true. The suicide rate in Spain is relatively low because if you're Catholic and you commit suicide, you don't have a graveyard to be buried in because almost all the graveyards in Spain are hallowed ground. They're Catholic graveyards. So I don't know where they bury you. I guess out on top of a hill somewhere. Axiomatic theories are untestable statements or assumptions about the phenomenon in question, stating a direct causal relationship. Axiomatic theories are so basic that they require no further empirical proof. And we're going to come up with some of the axiomatic theories in just a second. Axiomatic theory contains a set of concepts and definitions, both conceptual and operational, a set of statements describing the situations in which it can be applied to, a set of relational statements divided into axioms and theorems. The system of logic employed to relate all concepts within statements. It's to deduce theorems from axioms, combinations of axioms, and other theorems. The advantages of axiomatic theory: it can be used to coordinate research, giving the highest plausibility to a theory. It allows researchers to examine all the consequences of your axioms, which helps determine which parts of the theory have been verified. It's most compatible for causal analyses. Now, if you watch Big Bang Theory, and of course it's off the air now, but I'm sure it's in rerun. But if you watch some of the Big Bang Theory, a lot of times Sheldon is saying to Leonard says something, and Sheldon will say, "Well, that's axiomatic. Everybody knows that." Which is that's what axiomatic kind of means. It means everybody knows that because this is very logical. One thing follows the other, and a lot of times, of course, as a scientist, they would say something is axiomatic, and as a non hard scientist, as a non physicist, I don't know what's axiomatic and what's not axiomatic, as far as physics is concerned, which is kind of interesting. So it just means everybody knows that one thing follows the other. Actually, the only person who this is concepts of 10 axioms in psychology. The only person whose behavior we can control is our own. External control, and individuals try to control others. It is at the expense of an effective working relationship. The only person that you can control is your own behavior. You can't control anybody else's behavior. If you don't think that's correct, then you've never had anybody that was 2 years old living in your house. All we can get from other people is information. How we deal with that information is our choice or their choice. So we can't get truths. We can't get anything but information. And what we have to do with that information is determine whether it's accurate or inaccurate. All long-lasting psychological problems are relationship problems. I'm not exactly sure I'd agree with that, but in cognitive psychology, that's probably true. The problem relationship is always part of our present lives. So if you have a brother or sister, or your mother and father, or your grandparents that won't have anything to do with you, this is always on your mind. So if I have a brother that is conservative and I'm relatively liberal, so the two of us don't talk, but I think about my brother all the time. A lot of times when I'm having a liberal debate, I think about him because I know what he would say. What happened in the past that was painful has a great deal to do with what we are today, but revisiting this painful past contributes little, if anything, to what we need to do now: improve an important relationship. And of course, the problem is that our problem relationships are the ones that are the most important to us. So if we're dealing with something painful that happened in the past, we tend to remember this. And of course, but the only way of dealing with this is to go to the person that we're having a bad relationship with and deal with it, because that's the pain. We can only satisfy our needs by satisfying the pictures in our quality world. No, that's not an axiom. All we do is behave. If you're doing anything, you're behaving in one way or another. All behavior is, I was talking about sheltering in place, and the fact that I haven't put on any shoes all week, is a behavior. I haven't done anything. I've just sat in the corner of my son's couch and worked on my class, but that's behavior. All behavior is total behavior and is made up of 4 components: acting, thinking, feeling, and physiology. And of course, I haven't walked. I had 2,000 steps yesterday. I have 2,657 right now. I did push-ups this morning, but that's the physiological aspect. Am I going to my muscles going to atrophy because I'm not doing anything? If I were back in Iowa, I'd probably be outside because I live in the middle of a cornfield and I'm sheltering just by being home. But I have feelings and I'm thinking thoughts, and I'm acting in a select way. And hopefully I'm acting appropriately to get along with my son. All total behavior is chosen, but we only have direct control over the acting and thinking components. We can only control our feeling and physiology indirectly through how we choose to act and think. And of course, Right now, I'm not protesting, but if I were, of course, that would be thinking and acting, and being out and being, I don't know, wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. All total behavior is designated by verbs and named by the part that is the most recognizable. So if you're happy, you're sad. Wait a minute, those aren't verbs, are they? Anyway, there we go, axioms. Models are closely related to theories. Models are viewed as a likeness of something. Models usually consist of symbols. Models help simplify and order our view of reality by representing its essential characteristics for easier understanding. So if you're taking statistics this summer, the symbols that we're going to use are, some of them are numbers, and some of them are letters, and those letters, however they're configured, they mean something. So one of the things that we're going to I think my son may be teaching that class. One of the things we're going to do is try to define all these symbols, because the symbols, if you understand what the symbols mean, it's a little bit easier to read the formulas. Models are used for gaining insights into phenomena that cannot be observed directly. The Myers-Briggs type indicator is a technique that claims to produce a representation of a person's preferences using 4 scales. These scales can be combined in various ways to produce 16 personality types. Types are typically denoted by 4 letters. For example, INTJ, introverted intuition with extroverted thinking, to represent a person's preferences. This model is claimed by CPP, formerly known as Consulting Psychologist Press, to produce a good predictor of a person's career and marriage partner preferences. This is really kind of curious, because when I was teaching up in Montana, the state bought the Myers-Briggs, and they were giving it to all of their high school students and their college students. So every year, this guy would come in and he would give all my students the Myers-Briggs. Of course, if they'd taken it before, usually they would get about the same score. But the idea was that they were supposed to think about what their personality traits were, and it didn't have anything to do with marriage. It had to do with their career. What they were trying to do was make them career-minded, so that all the kids in Montana would try to be an engineer, or they try to be a mathematician or whatever, or a physicist or a psychologist. I've taken the Myers-Briggs, and I always come up with that they think that I need to be in a helping profession. Well, what did I do before I was a psychologist? Well, I was working in medicine, so that's a helping profession. And psychology is a helping profession. So I guess it fits with me, but of course, there's a lot of people that don't think that the Myers-Briggs is very accurate. The people that Myers and Briggs, the 2 individuals that came up with this, it was a lady and her mother-in-law. I think she was Myers and her mother-in-law was Briggs. Anyway, they're the ones, and Myers is her maiden name. Anyway, they're the ones that came up with this. They weren't psychologists. They just came up with these questions. They started selling it, and CPP bought into it. And there's a lot of people that think it's accurate. However, it should be pointed out that there is considerable disagreement among psychologists on whether this assessment technique and the implied idealized personality model is of any value. Now, the curious thing that I always found when I was looking at people's scores, the I stands for introvert, and I always score as a borderline introvert. I'm more introverted than I am extroverted, but it's a really close. It's really close. Almost all the natives that I was dealing with up there were extroverted, which I found curious, because I couldn't get them to talk in class unless they were an elder, and the elders tend to talk in class. But I couldn't get any of the kids to talk, which was kind of curious. We're not. But tell them to say a prayer. They have prayers before before powwows and before all these things. And you could ask a 12-year-old kid, 12-year-old native kid up there, to say a prayer. And boy, I'll tell you what, they always came up with a prayer. If you asked me to do a prayer, oh, it's a piece of crap. James Montgomery developed a dynamic model to explain why the population of Puerto Rico became whiter through the middle of the 20th century. He attributed it to these factors: differential fertility, which is the idea that fertility rates might differ dramatically by race; racial classification of children, especially of mixed race children; and racial switching of persons from one race to another. In the United States, our races are very definite. If you have any black blood, then you're black. If you're primarily white, and if you look white, then they consider you white. You Hispanic. And in the old days, they just asked you if you're a Hispanic. Now they ask you if you're Hispanic black or Hispanic white, which I find really curious. If you're Native, you're American Indian, I guess is what the Census Bureau talks about, and Asian Pacific Islander. are some things, but there are a lot of American Indians don't like to think of themselves as Asian, but potentially you could call yourself Asian if you wanted to go back that far, as curious as that is. Okay, but in Puerto Rico had a relatively large slave population that worked the sugar plantations. And these individuals stayed there, of course, after the slaves were freed. And it's a fairly open society. So there are a lot of people who have, they're one quarter black, and they're three-quarters white, because there was a large white population there as well. And there was also a native population. So they had, in the United States, if you have any black ancestry, potentially you call yourself black. But in Puerto Rico, that doesn't have to happen. As you get paler and paler, as you have children with paler and paler people, your children become paler, and eventually they're going to look white, where they can classify themselves as white, as curious as that is. And if you look at this population, are you going to call all these people black? All these Puerto Ricans, you're going to call them black, or are you going to call them all white? Are you going to say, well, this little girl in front, has her hair texture looks more black than white, but this lady, who's probably her mother, as you can see, has relatively straight hair, and of course he has hair the same texture, and so does she. This little girl. Are we going to identify people by their skin texture, or their hair texture, or their facial features? How many of these individuals would you qualify as black or white? In the United States, it's important. In Puerto Rico, it's not. Montgomery's model abstracts certain aspects of these dynamics, and focuses on four components and four processes connecting these components. Here we go. So, is this little girl black, or is she white? Is this little girl black or white? They can say they're Hispanic black, I guess, as far as the census is concerned. Is this child black, or is he white? Is she black or white? I've been around Puerto Ricans. Well, there's a lot of Puerto Ricans in the United States military, and of course, this is not a question that you ask anybody: are you black or white? It's only a question that would come up if you were in the United States. But I certainly didn't ask any of my friends. One of my best friends up in Fort Belknap was Puerto Rican, and of course he claimed that he was of native. He looked white, and he claimed he was of native ancestry. He didn't look as native as the people living on the reservation, but he claimed native ancestry. Well, and I'm not going to argue with him, certainly. I'm not going to force him to call himself white. If he wants to call himself American Indian, he married an American Indian, and all of his children are half Grovan. So what does that make him? If he wants to call himself American Indian, I guess he can. which got kind of interesting when when your children are born. Of course, you declare you have somebody has to issue a certificate of Indian blood, and of course his wife is 100% American Indian. So when he went to the courts to state what they were, he claimed 1/4 Taino, which is the native population on Puerto Rico. And yeah, that became an argument because they didn't want to give him any native ancestry. And of course, he couldn't prove it because that's not something anybody talks about. You don't have to have a certificate of Indian blood on the island of Puerto Rico. Very curious. Okay. I know. Not everybody's the same. We have ideas in the United States that other people don't even think about. If you go to Brazil, they have 24 different races down there, or they identify 24 different races. A lot of difference than in the United States. We're going to do the census and wait until you look at all the categories. And of course, you're going to say I'm an American Indian, but if you look at all the different categories, those are all subjective. That's all just the way you think of yourself. The model is cyclical and it follows the iteration. This iteration, the distribution of couples is considered with pairings such as white, 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 black, black, mulatto, and so on. Mulatto is half white, half black. That is the term that they use in Puerto Rico. Of course, we don't use it in the United States, but once upon a time before slavery was gone, mulatto was a term. So was maroon. Maroon meant that you weren't 100% black. It meant that you had some white ancestry, as curious as that is. Okay, well, anyway, that has to do with history. So here we're talking about black and mulatto and so on. These couples have children which are sorted by the race of the parents. The children go through their own racial classification independent of their parents and are redistributed as such. These children become adults and couples. Some of these men and women might switch their race and reclassify themselves within each couple, for instance, from white mulatto to white black, or from white or white white. So if we're looking at this little girl right here, what does she call herself? What do her parents call herself? Maybe, these two people, their complexion is fairly similar, but maybe he calls himself white mulatto and maybe she calls herself white white. And these are all classifications that they use in Puerto Rico. Is this important? Sure, because if she calls herself white, then she's more likely to marry somebody who identifies themselves as white as well. She might marry this guy. She might marry this guy, but he claims that he's white mulatto or white black. It all depends on who his parents are and how he feels about these things, as curious as all of this is. What an interesting argument to have. The social sciences rest on two major components, the theory and empirical research. Theory is a controversy about which of these components should come first. Should you come up with a theory and then do the research, or should you do the research and then come up with the theory? And of course, I show the horse before the cart and the cart before the horse, as curious as that is. Anyway, that's the way we have to look at things. So should we do the research and then come up with the theory, or should we come up with a theory and then come up with research to test it? Karl Popper developed a theory before research process that works like this. 1, construct an explicit model or theory. 2, select a proposition derived from the theory or model for empirical investigation. 3, design a research project to test the proposition. 4, if the proposition derived from the theory is rejected by the empirical data, make changes in the theory or research project and return to stage 2. If the proposition is not rejected, select other propositions for testing or attempts to improve the theory. So Karl wanted you to write the theory first, then you did the research. If the research didn't prove the theory, then you either change the theory and then do more research, or if the research did show that the theory was correct. Try to find other ways of proving that the theory was correct. However, Robert Merton from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has argued for a research then theory argument, with empirical research suggesting new problems for theory, calling for new theoretical formulations, leading to the refinement of existing theories and serving the function of verification. The theory then research strategy consists of these stages: investigate a phenomenon and delineate its attributes, measure the attributes in a variety of situations, analyze the resulting data to determine whether there are systematic patterns of variation. Once systematic patterns are discovered, then you construct your theory. So he wanted you to do the research first, not just identify your problem, but do your research first and then come up with a theory. And that is the end of this lecture. I'm going to stop right now. I have another chapter to tackle, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'll do that in another lecture. Okay, I think this has been going on long enough. And I'm losing my voice. So it's great being back in the saddle. Here I am teaching another class. I'm really excited about it. So you got another lecture coming over chapter 3. It's not going to be nearly as long as this one is. But this is chapter 3. This isn't chapter 3. Anyway. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. All right. I'm stopping right here. There's one more lecture.